Just recently, we found out that there was a cruise that just got back to Florida that had 94 people affected by norovirus, an outbreak. I mean, it's not the first time we've heard of a norovirus outbreak on a cruise ship, but my goodness, 94 people. We want to talk a little bit more about it, and we're going to bring in our cruise blogger, our expert, to tell us more about it. Now, when I say 94 that were affected, were you one?
I was on the ship, but thankfully I was not affected by norovirus. And in fact, it was a lot less dramatic than I'd always thought it would to be on a cruise ship when an outbreak happens.
Okay, well, tell us about what happened.
So it was a lengthy cruise. It was a bucket list cruise, a cruise of a lifetime, Panama Canal. It was a long one, about 2 weeks. And so about 3 days before debarkation, the captain came over the ship-wide public announcement system, which is rare for this cruise line. They don't do that often. So I was in my room. That caught my attention. I actually recorded it because I knew he was going to announce something big. And the announcement was very vague. At that time, he simply said that there had been a number of participants or cruisers on that particular sailing that had reported gastrointestinal symptoms and issues and that were seeking medical help, and to please remember to wash your hands. And I didn't think much else of it until the next day. I inquired at guest services what was happening, and they told me that at that time there were only about 26 cases, and that it started with 2, had doubled the next day to 4 to 8. So it pretty much had a doubling effect. And I didn't even know that we were an official CDC outbreak cruise until I got home. And in fact, the cruise line never even notified us. I learned about it in the news. So that was interesting, and I didn't expect that. I thought the cruise line would tell us that that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, have you had any communication with the cruise line since about the fact that, yeah, you would think if all of that was happening, then maybe some type of notification would have gone out?
It would stand to reason. And in 45 cruises, this is the first time I've ever been on a cruise that had an outbreak. So I always assumed that would be the case. But other than that one announcement that the captain made, again, a couple of days before the end of the cruise, we did not get any notification. And since being home, I actually saw the news about the outbreak the very night that I returned home and learned that the group that was embarking after we got off the ship, that their embarkation had been delayed because the cruise line had to go through a pretty stringent cleaning protocol to prepare the ship for the next group. So they were delayed getting on. But I've now been home basically a week as of Friday and have not heard anything from the cruise line other than what we've seen in the news. But I guess at this point, there's nothing that can be done. Of course, I read up on it. Norovirus symptoms usually present within 24 hours of exposure. So basically all the weekend, I was kind of anxious, like, oh, I hope I don't have any rumbling tummy issues. And thankfully I didn't. So obviously I'm in the clear now. But it was just shocking to learn that cruisers really don't get any notification at all. Now, we did see some of these enhanced cleaning protocols happening on the ship. So that was kind of my visual signal that, okay, things are actually getting worse. But other than that, we didn't get any official communication.
Okay, and Holland America has put out a statement saying the health of our guests and crew is a top priority and consistent with CDC protocols. We conducted a comprehensive sanitization of the ship when the cruise ended Friday in Fort Lauderdale. You've spoken before, we've spoken before about what happens when things go down on a cruise ship, and you mentioned like looking into blogs to see when people are talking, like the chats. Sometimes people have a conversation in the chat about what's happening, and that's your first inclination, or that's maybe your first revelation about what's happening on the ship. Did you look into the chat?
I did, and sure enough, the social media commentary is way ahead of official cruise line notification. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is an important reminder to cruisers to really stay plugged into these groups, because that's where you're going to hear it first and foremost. So you have to be careful, because rumors can ignite. So you have to make sure that you're using some discretion of determining what's true versus false. But there were some cruisers that posted in our group that they had been diagnosed with norovirus and they were actually quarantined in their room. So that was kind of the first indicator. And then there were some folks commenting, oh, us too. Then the captain's announcement came on. Then we noticed at dinner that they weren't letting us use salt and pepper. Or sugar for cappuccinos. The crew was coming and doing that for us. I noticed at guest services and places where they had ink pens that they had dirty pens and sanitized pens. All the self-serve stuff was removed from the coffee bar. So I started to see these things as well. But again, in terms of an official outbreak notification, still have received absolutely nothing from the cruise line at all. And again, if I were not plugged into cruise news, I would not really even know.
Yeah. When you think about not being allowed to use salt and pepper, I mean, it sounds like, whoa, wait a minute. But then you think about it. Well, they didn't want everybody touching the very same things because norovirus is highly contagious. And in fact, it's the #1 cause of foodborne illnesses in the United States, according to, the latest data here. You mentioned the symptoms appearing between 12 and 48 hours. So hopefully, foreseeably, you're in the clear. But do you think that things like this, like I mentioned when we first started this conversation, or when I was getting ready to come to you, that when you see things like this, it does give you pause as to whether you want to get on the next cruise. You've been on so many. Does this faze you at all?
It doesn't. And in fact, there are a number of cruise haters out there. I hear from them in social media every day that love to say, I would never take a cruise. Cruise ships are just floating petri dishes. And as much as I love cruising, okay, I will actually acknowledge there's a little bit of truth to that, because you are in a very contained situation with thousands of other people. On our particular cruise, it was actually a smaller ship, and still we had, with crew included, about 4,000 people in a very contained environment together for 2 weeks. So as I noted, guest services said that it started with just a couple of people that presented with symptoms, and that spread like wildfire. So that very much is the case. But there's common sense things that cruisers can take as measures to ensure that they are less likely to get sick. Obviously, hand washing is the most important thing. I actually didn't know this until I had this experience, that hand sanitizer, alcohol-based sanitizer, is not effective against norovirus. And I think a lot of times cruise lines have those sanitizing stations out. Cruisers have this false sense of safety and not realizing that's completely ineffective. And the big thing that I do, I know this is a hot take in cruise world, I do not like cruise line buffets. I know that's a big part of cruising. I avoid them when possible because I've seen some things.
So what do you do then?
So cruise ships have an abundance of places to eat. I always say you're never going to starve on a cruise ship. I always go to places on the ship where they actually prepare and serve the food to you. In general, even on land, I avoid buffets because people just have a tendency to not be very hygienic. I am a little OCD by nature, so I avoid buffets at all costs. And on a cruise ship, there's plenty of places there where you can get food that is served to you, not picked over and touched by people that don't wash their hands.
Yeah. The only cruise that I've been on, I want to say it was either somewhere between 3 and 5 days. And I think that people do think about, like, especially longer cruise ships or cruises, like what could happen in that extended period of time. And like, okay, if something does happen, I'm stuck out at sea.
That is definitely a concern that folks have. But I always remind people that generally on any cruise, regardless of the duration, if you actually look at the cruise map, which I love doing on a cruise, where it shows you your exact proximity in the ocean relative to land, you'll see that that ship pretty much hugs the coastline, unless you're doing something like a transatlantic or a trans-Pacific cruise. So you're never really too far from shore. And if things really do proverbially hit the fan, that captain can get you to land pretty quickly. So that is not a cause of concern for me. It's more of the lack of hygienic behaviors of other cruisers. But humans are humans. You're going to find bad hygiene everywhere at sea and at land.
Yeah, that is true. Or in space, as we have found out now. Things can happen anywhere. That is very true, very fair that things can happen anywhere. Thank you so much for your time. Melissa, where can people find you? Because I know you're always giving gems about the cruising world, and you're always on a cruise. So one, let me ask you where people can find you, but I'd also love to know, have you already booked the next cruise?
I have. It's my birthday cruise on Carnival Mardi Gras, and I'll be embarking in 2 weeks. So it's my annual tradition. I love it. But I do have a website, profmelissa.com, P-R-O-F, melissa.com. I actually have on my homepage a travel guide I wrote specifically for cruisers for travel insurance, because it pains me when I see cruisers not travel with travel insurance. And for my 90 plus fellow passengers that ended up in the medical center, they probably got an unpleasant bill realizing it's over $500 to seek medical treatment on a ship, and it's not covered usually by their US based health insurance. So I'm a big advocate of getting travel insurance for anyone that takes a cruise.
See, I said she drops gems. That's something most people wouldn't know. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you take care, Melissa Newman. Always great to catch up with her, and she really is always on the go. So she has already booked her next trip, even after getting off of a cruise that did have some issues there. She is unfazed, and that's kind of how you have to be if you're going to keep going on them.
Thanks for watching Fox 32 Chicago. Subscribe now for the stories that matter and never miss what's next.